Thanks everyone for coming to our program today. We're really excited to bring you this important information about reducing risk in real estate projects. We're going to talk about some of the things that folks run into and how you can hopefully reduce that risk. Um, we're excited today, next slide, we're excited today to have Jessica Nepomiachi from IFF with us, and she'll be digging into all the different considerations that you need to think about to reduce your risk with real estate projects. We're also excited that we have a guest speaker with us today, Nathaniel Green from Haas Cooperative Studios, which is an artist-owned cooperative in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. And he's going to be talking about their experience and lessons learned with their project from acquisition and renovation all the way to occupancy. And I just want to mention that we do have an example today from Chicago, but really most, if not all of the issues that we're going to be talking about can come up in any community. So our hope is that you're going to walk away today with a solid sense of what you might be getting into and know some ways to avoid those pitfalls. Our presentation time is going to be just under 30 minutes. We do have time set aside at the end for any questions. But we're also going to be doing some live polling at the very end of the program because we really want to learn if this series has been helpful for you and if there are any other topics that you would like to hear from Arts Alliance. While we have the presentations going, if you have questions, just please pop them into the chat if you would like to put them there. We can also address them at the end of the presentations, like I said. But before we dive in, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to give you all a brief overview of Arts Alliance and our help desk, which is bringing the program today. So at Arts Alliance, we are the statewide advocacy organization for the arts with individual and organizational members across all artistic disciplines in Illinois. And our mission is to build the creative sector's power through advocacy, policy change, and connection to resources to improve the quality of life in communities statewide. And we do our work according to 5 different pillars that we focus on. We are, like I said, first and foremost, an advocacy organization. So we're always working to equip the sector with the resources and tools that they need to meet their own financial and policy interests. We have a specific focus on creative workers to help increase the number of artists and creatives who are surviving, not just surviving, but thriving. We also focus on arts education to ensure that all Illinois K through 12 students have access to high quality arts learning. Public funding navigation, which is part of the program that's bringing you this webinar today, as we try to continue to support the sector to access resources that are out there and new resources so we can help navigate those complex systems for you. And then we're always doing research because we know it's important to have that data to be able to do case making and increase the public's support and understanding of the importance of arts and culture. We are bringing this, like I said, to you today from the help desk. Our help desk is designed to specifically support creatives in finding and applying for public funding. So we try to help you from the application support period to brainstorming on what resources that you need to helping you get connected to those resources. And we're working to connect you with even more opportunities beyond just what we call the usual suspects, things like tax credits, low interest microloans, and more. So if you can just, you can grab the link in the chat that we're going to pop in there right now, which is support.artsalliance.org. And that way you can submit a question to us. And that's also a way for you to access our resource materials that we have on our website. We have a document that we've put up recently on how public funding works in Illinois. So that's a great thing for you to check out. Next slide. So to connect with Arts Alliance, you can visit the help desk, as we mentioned. You can add your voice to our advocacy by signing up with our quorum, and you can also become a member. We are really excited with our membership program where we create specific spaces for people to connect with each other in their communities, in their discipline areas, and really support each other throughout the whole sector. Okay, great. So that's my commercial. We're going to pass it on to the primary program right now. I'm going to pass it over to Jessica from IFF, who's going to be highlighting what we need to look out for early in the real estate process, looking at issues like zoning, environmental considerations, parking requirements, licensing, and all the other things that we need to look at before we sign that contract or sign that lease. So passing it over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Can you guys see my screen now?
Yep, we can see it now.
Great. Thank you again for having me. This is the third and final webinar of a series we've been in partnership with the Arts Alliance. My name is Jessica Nepomiachi. I am the Managing Director of Real Estate Solutions at IFF, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Nathaniel Green, co-founder and co-owner of Haas Cooperative Studios. And he'll be talking a bit later. So I'm just going to move on and go and talk a bit about the agenda today. So we'll talk a little bit about IFF and our learning objectives. Some of this will be a repeat for those who have joined us in the past, but I do want to talk about setting up your facility project for success, the IFF readiness framework, and then that really ties to risk and risk mitigation in real estate. And then we'll, of course, have Nathaniel talk through his project that's actually under construction right now and some of the wonderful things that surprises that he'll talk us through in terms of risk and risk mitigation and how to plan for success even in the face of risk, which is definitely just an inherent part of real estate. So, for those that don't know, IFF is a nonprofit that supports other nonprofits in their real estate and capital and development needs, not just in Illinois, but across the Midwest. We do, like I said, lending to nonprofits. We do bridge loans and acquisition loans. Many of you know that public funding, capital funding is reimbursable. So we provide bridge loans to nonprofits that need to bridge public funding. We also provide facility loans for facility improvements. And as I mentioned, I sit on the real estate solutions team. So we are a real estate consulting practice where we bring best practices in facility design and arts and culture and across all sectors across the Midwest. We are a thought partner for facilities and financing. We show up and do technical assistance, coaching, resource partnership like webinars like this, and then engage in day-to-day project management as well. We work across a variety of sectors, as I mentioned, but do work with a lot of arts and culture orgs here in Chicago and across Illinois that do a lot of place-based initiatives and work in itinerant spaces as well. A lot of arts and culture spaces, as you know, work and program out of park district spaces, temporary spaces, and as well as in place-based spaces as well. And so our learning objectives today are to understand the IFF readiness framework in community development, understand risk in the creative sector, and then strategies to mitigate those risks in real estate, and then share stories and inspiration. Planning for success early on in real estate is really crucial. Many of you might have seen this slide before, and really, real estate and community development and programs meet at the intersection of mission and impact. So, what is the program you want to deliver and why? The unique facility build out of your program. So, do you need theater space? And what does that look like? Is that movable seating or fixed seating, right? Like these are the really specific considerations that you need to think about. And does your space require a unique build out? And then, of course, the most important, a viable business plan, right? How do you sustain operations over time, not just for your program, but for the long-term viability of a building? When we're thinking about success at the beginning of the project, it's again crucial to locate and think about how does your project deliver impact, not just for your community, but how do you measure that impact in terms of bringing that impact back to your board, back to your funders, and then of course, how does that impact drive feasibility? How is feasibility defined, and how is the feasibility tied to long-term financial sustainability? Owning a building, leasing a building cost money, resources, staff time. And so before doing that, you want to make sure that it's financially viable. Otherwise, it can cause harm. And then, of course, who's going to participate in that planning and who are your allies in that planning? We'll talk a little bit later with the case study around community engagement and making sure you identify who in the ecosystem is going to show up for you, especially when there's moments of tension. And so, um, when you're thinking about ideating your project and your program, it's not just about who you serve, but who do you want to bring in during that planning process. And then location, right? And so a lot of arts and culture groups serve, as I mentioned earlier, place-based initiatives. You need to be rooted in a specific community, and then others don't, right? You serve a much broader geography. And so thinking about your space and thinking about your geography um, is a really important question about like what's important about your location. Do you need to be located in a certain neighborhood? And is that because your staff live in a certain neighborhood, or is that because you serve a certain target population? Or how do your staff get to work, right? And then, of course, like I mentioned, who are your partners? Who are your current allies? And who are your funders? Who are your allies? Who are you going to call on along the way? I wanted to mention this early on in terms of planning for community input because effective community engagement really rests on two pillars, which is understanding and acknowledgement of past harms, but also, it's about building meaningful relationships with community members and moving from transactional interactions to genuine partnerships to create a shared value. And I think not engaging in effective input up front from a community around what a program is can not just damage reputation with community, but can actually engage in project delays, right? So if you need to go to a zoning board and ask for a special use, or you want to have a liquor license, or you want to have, some sort of block party, right? You want to make sure you bring people in early because otherwise you do put your project at risk in terms of maybe funding support. Municipal support, aldermanic support. And so the next slide I think is great because it kind of shows you at the top that there's a spectrum of community building. And so when you think about your project early on, I think it's important to think about what kind of community input you want to solicit. Do you want to just inform people of your project, or do you want to collaborate with them on framing what your project is? And so the blue boxes at the bottom give ideas on what informing someone might be. Informing might be, hey, I'm going to post on my website what this project is. But collaboration might be getting the community involved and actually designing what your program and facility might look like. And so we'll share these slides out for everyone who attended this. So no need to, save this for later. But don't wait for a zoning meeting or a neighbor calling the police on you to hear from your community, right? Being proactive up front is actually risk mitigation. And so I put this up at the beginning because this is actually about planning for success. Heading into the readiness framework, again, sorry if this is repetitive for some of you, but many of you are also new. So, IFF, we really consider three types of readiness when we are talking about a facility project. The first is real estate readiness, organizational readiness, and capital readiness. So we'll talk about all three of these in depth, but organizational readiness is simply put your organization's ability to achieve a facility project. And what this really means is your resources, your capacity, your schedule, inclusive of staff, administrative infrastructure, partnerships to actually engage in a facility project. And so that's both your staffing and your project team, like your day to day, who's leading a project, and then your project team, And we'll talk about that later, like who's actually doing the construction, who's the architect, who's leading your project. And then, of course, your board and who's on your board. And does your board have the experience needed to engage in a facility project? Do they have real estate experience? Do they have fundraising experience? Are they an active board? Are they out there helping you question the assumptions around revenue and expenses and a sustainable business model, especially if you're thinking about expanding or changing your programming? So, organizational readiness is really about, is your organization ready to engage in a facility project? Um, this is a spectrum, right? And so we'll talk later about risks and how to mitigate these. And so, again, and I'll talk later about how this is all iterative. And so this is not about are you in the right or wrong. This is about how do you assess your own readiness so that you can identify gaps and fill those gaps to make sure that you are taking on a facility project in the most well-prepared way. Real estate readiness is simply put all of the different activities that, uh, constitute a facility project. So, is there a site, right? And is that site owned? And do you understand the site conditions? Have you engaged in an environmental review? Do you understand the boundaries of the site? If you're building a new building, do you understand the soil conditions? We often call that geotechnical testing. Zoning, is there a zoning change required? Design, have you selected an architect? Do you need an architect, or are you just doing a minor rehab where you're, doing some minor work and you don't need a permit? If you're doing a design, do you understand what design drawings you need to get a permit? Construction. If you're doing construction, obviously, do you have a cost estimate? And do you know where you got that cost estimate from? I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients that got a cost estimate from their friend. And while I love friendly cost estimates, oftentimes those cost estimates don't include contingency or prevailing wage that's required by public funding. And so it's really important to make sure that the cost estimate is aligned with, the regulatory bodies in the system. And so, of course, is the project permit ready? And do you understand the path to get to that permit? So this is real estate readiness. And then capital readiness is essentially the readiness to seek capital funding for a facility project. So aside from program impact, funders look at organizational capacity, real estate readiness, and of course, the financial sustainability of operations. Capital readiness refers to understanding the project narratives and the project constraints as well. And what that means is the project gap, right? We understand that projects take time to fundraise. And so funders want to understand the project risks and the project timeline and the timing of capital needs. And so funders want to understand, what do we know about the ecosystem of funding today? And what do we know about that can help inform the project get funding? So, what do we know about the state budget that just passed, for example, about, how does that impact my project today? Oh, I was hoping that my state legislator was able to get me money in the budget this year, but I didn't. Hey, philanthropy, can you help me out this year instead, right? What do we know about the ecosystem? Capital readiness also refers to not to the amount, right? What does the project cost? And the timing of money. So people often, don't understand that capital isn't just the amount, but the timing of money. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of the funding comes in and is reimbursable. So, unfortunately, public money is not free. It comes at a cost, which means that you have to do the work and then get reimbursed. That often means you have to get a bridge loan or pay for it yourself. And so that means you have to have cash on hand, not just to maybe do the construction, but actually to pay for your architects, your attorneys. That means you need pre-development funding. And so considering your timing of money is an essential part of capital readiness to assess what you might need and planning for your cash flow. This really leads me to why is a project budget important, which may seem like, hey, it's a project budget, right? Of course it's important, but it's actually a number of, it's a tool for many reasons, right? It's a feasibility tool. It helps us identify project assumptions at the start. It's a decision-making tool. It helps us understand, oh, this number came in too high. Maybe we need to rethink our project assumptions. It's also a storytelling tool. It helps us identify what are the things that are missing. Do we need to go back and ask for more money? Do we need to revisit and take out some program scope? It's a tracking tool. It can help us understand where we've spent money so far. How do we plan for additional cash flow? And it's also a risk mitigation tool. We can plan for unforeseen circumstances in the budget. One of the things that we'll talk about in terms of risk mitigation is understanding and aligning with your board and your partners. How will you manage the balancing of tensions between program scope and the budget? So, how does the scope drive the budget, or does the budget drive your scope? So, some of you will say, I'm going to build and I'm going to design whatever I want to do, and I'm going to raise the money for it. And some of you will say, I only have a limited amount of capital and I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to design something with the limited amount of capital. And some of you will have many different voices in the room giving you conflicting ideas. And so, what do you know about capital and operating priorities within your board and your staff and your program and your impact that will allow you to balance these tensions? And how does that inform your project planning? One of the things that I mentioned earlier is this is really iterative. And so this is really start and stop, right? You might be having real estate readiness where you have your site identified, you're already owning a building, you are then in the process of fundraising for a project, right? And you fundraise for a year and you have your architect design something and you cost estimate it, and then it comes in a little bit too high. And so you pause your design, you pause your real estate for 6 months while you fundraise for another 6 months. And so it's iterative, right? It starts and it stops until you are aligned on that scope and that budget. Or you might have a capacity gap and you need to fill that capacity in your organization until you can actually move forward with real estate readiness. So that's why I think this is an important way to think about how you assess your readiness before you engage in a real estate project. It's actually a way to mitigate your risk. Risk factors and risk mitigation. You'll see that a lot of this ties back, right? Risk is the difference between expectations and realizations. I'm not going to lie, as we know, risk is real estate. It's a measure of uncertainty around the future. Examples of risk are everything in real estate: timeline, funding, zoning, community engagement, environmental, market. It's unavoidable. So, really, this is about our capacity to manage risk and our capacity to make as many of assumptions early on and plan for those assumptions. And so the most important thing up front is really identifying your assumptions around space and programming up front. So thinking about who's going to be visiting your space, how many times a day. So are you going to be serving alcohol at your space? Is alcohol a big part of your revenue generating plan because you want to have events? What time of day are you going to be serving alcohol? Where? Is it going to be indoors or outdoors? Are you going to be putting performances on? Are you going to be having performances for more than 100 people? Are you going to be needing people to park their cars? These are all questions that, really, really are going to inform how the local municipality is going to engage in the assessment of your zoning and your licensing and permitting. This is really important for the creative sector. The next thing is really determining your design needs for the property. So, what are your building's existing conditions? And can it serve your proposed programs? Do you need to renovate it? And if you need to renovate it, should you phase your renovation? One of the key things to think about is if you're phasing a renovation, are you going to be occupying the building while you're phasing a renovation? Um, and if so, um, you know, how does that look in terms of are you operating or are you pausing operations? On the flip side, are you not operating at all and you're pausing? And then what does it look like to plan for revenue after you're completed with your programming? Do you need to increase your expenses? For example, hiring new staff to manage your expanded programs. How are you going to then increase your revenue? Um, Thinking back to the proposed program and the existing conditions, hiring an architect or working with an architect early is crucial to understand if the proposed activities are temporary or permanent. That leads to if zoning and licensing is needed. And so, one of the key things about risk mitigation is do not enter into any financial commitments like signing a lease or a purchase and sale agreement for a property prior to conducting a zoning review with your municipality. So, um, do not assume that a building that you're buying, if it was previously operating as an art gallery, can operate today. Because as I mentioned earlier in those previous questions, if you are going to be hosting an art gallery event with alcohol and the previous gallery wasn't, that actually will most likely change the licensing requirements. If you are planning to have events in an outdoor garden and before the owner didn't do that, that might also change the licensing requirements. So do never assume that what was prior in the building is now going to be allowed. So it's really important to understand your specific program as it's tied to this specific building. Without doing that early on, you really do put your funding and acquisition and program at risk. Understanding the existing conditions of the building, as I mentioned earlier, is also really important because in Chicago and everywhere in this country, we have lead and asbestos and hazardous materials in every building, unfortunately. In fact, I believe asbestos was just banned about a couple of years ago, if you can believe it. So, if you're considering buying an old building, you really do want to pay for environmental reporting, especially around radon, underground storage tanks, right? If you're going to get a loan from an acquisition loan or a loan from a funder or even a public grant, they're going to ask if you have any environmental issues on that building. And so you don't want to enter in any contract unless you understand that there's environmental issues because you will have to mitigate those issues. And that can be costly. So before buying something and you can also do use that information as a way to negotiate the acquisition price, right? And so it's really crucial to understand the environmental conditions up front. Um, and so making sure you work with an environmental consultant ahead of time. And then, of course, like as I mentioned earlier, there's minimum parking requirements, on-site and off-site parking requirements, accessibility compliance. So we do have the ADA laws where any, accessible pathways, right? Old buildings, if you put any new money in them or federal money in them, a lot of new laws trigger that you have to make the buildings accessible to all. And so making sure that if you're going to buy a building that is not accessible and you are planning to renovate it, you build into your budget funding to make it accessible. This is a part of risk mitigation, or you make sure you purchase a building that is already accessible, right? So these are the different tensions you want to negotiate up front. And then, as I mentioned earlier, traffic studies and parking are often required for theater, music venues with proposed occupancies of 100 people or more. And so here in Chicago, we actually have a lot of folks that purposely do their programming for less than 99 people to avoid the parking requirements, right? And so there's a lot of ways to move around this, but it does impact the ability to generate revenue. So these are the different trade-offs, but it is part of risk mitigation. So this is just kind of a repeat, but work with your architect, do a preliminary site assessment, make sure you understand your parking requirements. These things can be uh, expensive and time consuming, but determining early if you need them will help you in the long run. Um, Moving to capital readiness. And so, as I mentioned, the pre-development phase does require having cash on hand to engage in a zoning process if you need it. And so, as I mentioned, also considering the timing of funding. And so, we have, here in Chicago, or for example, Illinois has legislative earmarks, appropriations. Those are reimbursable grants. Of course, people, you can request a working capital advance on that. However, you need to get you need to get a pre-development funding. So that is not, unfortunately, available money from these public sources. And so identifying what sources that you have on hand early on to pay for the architect, to pay for the environmental, to pay for the special use permit if you need, to do a traffic study, to do a zoning study. And then projects need to pivot. So I'm really excited for you all to hear from Nathaniel soon and have me stop talking so that you can hear how he's probably had to pivot many times. And really, again, thinking about unforeseen conditions, construction cost increases, having different scenarios, alternatives, to really always have options and alternatives, because that's a big part of mitigating risk is being able to say, okay, I can't go with this material because it's too expensive. How do I think about being able to deliver my program, but maybe I'll choose a different material because that's less expensive. And then, of course, again, I'm always going to bring this back to financial viability, right? Without long-term financial viability, there's no program. And so, how do you generate revenue to continue operations while also fundraising? Something to continuously consider, especially if you need to pause programming while you're engaging in a facility project or you're doing a phased construction. So, gonna just call out developing a project schedule. So, as I mentioned earlier, the budget is a tracking tool. It can help you track when you need to pay for your different vendors. So, you know, cash flow planning early on, tying that to your construction schedule. To, work with your project team to clarify project assumptions. So your architect, when do you need to make assumptions on design? Constantly having that conversation about managing that tension. When does budget drive scope, or when does scope drive budget? I'm going to say this again and again, never have less than a 10% contingency, please. So this is because you will always have construction, unforeseen circumstances. And then, as I mentioned, it's great to get a friendly estimate from a friend on a contractor, but here in Chicago and the state of Illinois, if you're using public funding, you always want to make sure that your contractor is pricing in Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage, because these are the wage requirements that come with public funding. And so, this does increase your job, but you want to make sure that the construction job is actually priced accurately. You don't want to find out later that your job costs 2 times more than originally priced because your contractor didn't price it accurately. One of the ways to mitigate that risk is to solicit bids from multiple contractors for competitive pricing and to engage in an equitable procurement process. Organizational readiness. So, as I kind of laid this out, everyone here is probably running their own nonprofits, running their own arts and culture orgs, and planning a facility project requires significant organizational readiness. And so, having a dedicated staff, a team, a plan of consultants to do this, I highly recommend. And identifying early what gaps need to be filled, I also highly recommend, because you can't do this alone. It takes a village. And so one of the things I really want to call out is, like, who's going to be the day-to-day project lead, right? Who's going to be the public facing lead? And what specialized support do you need to build your capacity? And so being realistic about what capacity do you need to bring about the success of this project. So do you need a zoning attorney? And if so, who is that zoning, hire someone that has specific zoning um, experience. Meeting with your residents and elected officials is really important early on, especially when you're seeking a special use permit. So if you're in a residential area and you want to bring a music venue, you got to speak to your residents early, right? If you want to bring a pop-up space, right? A public plaza here in Chicago, we have a pop-up public plaza program. Again, you want to bring in people early so that they can understand what's going to be happening in the community. And you want to also build a coalition of supporters who can come speak on behalf of the project. And I think that's it. I'm going to pass it over to Nathaniel. And of
Amazing.
course,
Thank
if
you.
there's
Oh,
questions in the chat, I will answer them after. I just can't see them
okay.
now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. That was amazing. We really, really wish we had that readiness here. But hi, everyone. My name is Nathaniel Green. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Oz Cooperative Studios, and I will be serving as the case study for an organization that did not have this readiness framework. And to give you guys an idea of what that kind of entailed for us personally, and see if there's any gems that you guys can kind of glean from that. So the organization I've co-founded is called Oz Cooperative Studios. We're a worker-owned, artist-run cooperative based here in Chicago that's designed to help Black and Brown creatives choose art as a viable career. We do that by providing tools, resources, and networks to lower the entry barrier into doing art full time and increase their maximal potential financial output, allowing them to have a sustainable career in the arts. We were founded in 2020 during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, during that disruption that COVID brought us. And we had a very open-ended but kind of slightly detailed idea as to what kind of resources and tools we wanted to provide to our community. And part of that was having a physical location, a place for our community and our creatives to kind of come and build that community together, work together, collaborate, network, and even create the art, showcase the art, things like that. So as we started to figure out who we want to serve and how. Again, we want to serve primarily Black and Brown creatives in Chicago South and West Sides. So we wanted to find a location that was more accessible. Here in Chicago, we have a lot of arts organizations and things on the North Side. Um, but due to public transportation or just the way the city is slightly segregated, it's really hard for our community to get north. So we want to stay south. And we specifically chose Pilsen, which is very centrally located from a lot of public transportation. It's known as the heart of Chicago. It has this arts district here. It's a very, very beautiful town or part of Chicago to be a part of. So that was our ideal location. Um, Initially, we started trying rent around the area because we are an alternative economic model as a worker co-op. It was a very difficult for us to find somebody willing to rent to us and kind of it was a lot of barriers to that. Which we also had barriers to buying, which was our next step was saying, okay, if we can't rent and we're having these issues, let's just buy something of our own. And we ended up finding a place for sale, a building for sale in Pilsen in our ideal location, within our budget, and we decided to go for it. Now, procuring a building is amazing, right? We found something that matches everything that we wanted. Great. And then there was also like a lot of hurdles towards actually purchasing the building. But like I mentioned, if you can go to the next slide, like I mentioned before, we did not have that readiness framework training. So we kind of went into it. We was like, this building is perfect. It has all the things we wanted. It has like a nice outdoor space because we wanted to have some green space for our community. Has a third space. It was already operating with an artist, or artists owned it initially. And so we're like, oh, we can do an art gallery in here because there's already big ceilings, white walls, all these fun things. Um, but after we purchased the building, we started to run into a lot of issues, not only with zoning, but then issues with the neighbors and trying to get our zoning up to code. Um, One of the big things we noticed was that as we were operating as an art gallery, it was not really zoned or have any permits, business permits or anything for the building initially. We thought it did. The person who sold it to us kind of mentioned like, oh, it's already an art gallery. You don't have to worry about it. We worried about it when the cops began showing up. So that's the one thing, at least here in Chicago, if you do not have the right permits, they will show up. If you are doing anything over 99 people or what have you, the compliance officers or the Department of Buildings or whoever, they will show up and there will be a fine or they will shut you down. And it makes operating your business just that much more difficult, especially when you do try to go get it. So once we found that out, we had those issues. We began going to figuring out exactly what it is that we wanted to do with our location. Because like I mentioned earlier, what we wanted to do was very broad in scope. We wanted to showcase and support Black and Brown creatives, but that encompasses a lot of different things. So we had a lot of different ideas, but we had to really gauge our space and then what we were actually zoned to do in our area and what they will allow us to do in our area, and then kind of narrow down the community we want to serve or the types of art we wanted to showcase based off of that. So there's a lot of back and forth. We tried to go based off of city checklists and what they wanted, what they said that we could do or could not do based off of our zoning on the website or going down to our city hall here. And even though we followed those checklists, we still had issues with zoning compliance and people showing up and saying, actually, no, although you technically you meet this requirement, we say you don't meet this requirement. There's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of gray area. And unfortunately, a lot of it can be up to those individual compliance officers that show up, which is why it's so important. Eventually, we got to the point we had to hire a zoning attorney to fight on our behalf. We had a good relationship with our alderman. We had some issues with some neighbors because of the type of events and things that we were hosting. I know Jessica mentioned that earlier, and we did not speak to our neighbors beforehand. We spoke to some of our community, some of our artist community, but there is some residential places around us, and we did not speak with them. So we got in touch with our aldermen to have us sit down with our neighbors to detail what all their grievances were, talk about what all, we planned on doing, found some middle grounds as to how we can make sure we can still support our community of creatives while also being cognizant of the fact that there is residential places around us and finding some middle ground there. So this would have been a lot of this headache would have been avoided if we had done this beforehand, especially talking with our zoning attorney, but we're very glad we did. One of the drawbacks to not speaking to a zoning attorney, this is one of the issues we had, was that when we eventually decided to go for our public place of amusement license, we had to shut down operations for nearly a year while we were going through all of our compliance checklist things with the zoning attorney and getting everything up to code. Um, because we were having so many complaints and things were happening that it was potentially jeopardizing our ability to get a PPA, whether the zoning board would approve it or maybe the alderman would say no because there were so many complaints coming in. A lot of it was from a previous tenant, but that's another thing we'll talk about in another slide. But we had to shut down operations. And so it definitely impacted our organization financially, having to have a mortgage and having to have, a building and a space to upkeep. But now we have to shut down operations in order to get this license that we needed to do operations. Which was very difficult for us. We were fortunately able to make it through. We have our public place of amusement license. So we got everything going and we're able to operate. And we're able to also now we're going to be doing some more construction, which is going to be fun. But again, if we had a plan for this in advance, we could have had all of this done before we had the building, and then we could have hit the ground running without having these interruptions or without having these issues. Next slide, please. So that's some of the issues we had with like zoning and trying to get out. There's a lot more. So if you have any other questions regarding that zoning process, please feel free to, oh, it's a little odd how that
Sorry.
showed up. But definitely feel free to throw all those questions in the chat and we can talk about those afterwards. But another thing we can talk about is just what it's like to run the actual space, right? You have all these ideas, you have this vision, you get the space, maybe you go through the zoning and you go through all that fun stuff, but actually operating the space is a whole nother beast in and of itself. One thing I would recommend would be having somebody, whether you hire a facilities person or you are the facilities person, somebody who's there regularly that can see the issues. If you're water heater starts to flood a little bit, you need to know before your basement floods, right? You need to be able to see that. You need somebody checking these things. And those are some of the unexpected things that can come up with this. And it's unfortunate no matter how much planning you kind of do, there's a lot of unexpected things that will show up. So initially for us, after we had the building, things were going fine, but our AC upstairs went out, right? This is something we did not plan for. We just spent a bunch of money on procuring the place and fixing it up and remodeling. The AC goes out, another unexpected cost. We had some flooding in the basement that shows up, or our roof that was supposedly brand new began to leak. All these things show up randomly. And if you, unfortunately for us, I am a union electrician, so I'm handy with tools, and my stepfather is a carpenter. And so I have a lot of, as you can see here, I've been able to reshape our space and add some things that kind of fit more as to what our organization needs. But if you don't have those expertise, you should have people ready, or that you have contractors already ready, a plumber that you usually go to, or a maintenance person that you have who has these expertise so you can take care of it quickly without, your AC being down for a few months because you're looking at it and you don't know what you're looking at. And like I said, it's another unforeseen cost. But yeah, these are some of the things we have to deal with. On top of one of the issues we were having was there was some bunch of complaints we spoke about earlier. We had tenants when we initially moved in. So if some of you are purchasing a building or property, and sometimes you have tenants upstairs or what have you, you have to deal with what they do as well, right? So they were throwing these late night rager parties that we did not know about. And so a lot of the complaints the community was giving to the police department, to the alderman or what have you, were because of them. But because now we own the building and we were the commercial level, a lot of that was being attributed to us. So it's important to, like I said, speak to not only your neighbors, surrounding neighbors, but you have to also deal with if you have tenants or anyone else. There's a lot of unforeseen quirks or interesting things with buildings that you have to deal with. Next slide, please. And so lastly, I would like to close it off. It's like, yes, it is a lot of work, especially doing the readiness beforehand, but the payoff is seeing the community that you're out to serve, or seeing the creatives or people that you're working with actually use the space, right? Seeing them come into the space, not only enjoy it, but then tell you, hey, you've created such a great atmosphere. Hey, you've created such a safe space. I feel good being here, watching creatives actually create art in your space and showcase art in your space. If you're an arts organization, or even if you're a nonprofit and you have different programs or whatever, seeing that impact on the community you're seeking to serve is such a good feeling. And I can only imagine that it feels even better when you follow the checklist and get everything nailed out first, so that when you do go into it, you can jump right into serving that community. You don't have any hiatus. Um, so yeah, I would just, along with Jessica's point earlier, just recommend talking to some attorneys, getting your checklist ready. If you don't know anything about pre-development, find somebody who can help you with these pre-development checklists or these budget checklists or what have you. Getting that 10% contingency, all of that is super important. And although it is annoying and time consuming, because a lot of times we want to jump right to the thing, is I highly recommend getting that stuff taken care of ASAP first. Do your due diligence, and it will just make the actual mission you're trying to accomplish so much more gratifying, I would say. But again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. My name is Nathaniel with Oz Cooperative Studios, and I will turn it back over to you, Jessica.
I think we're turning it to Megan. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you so much. This was so great. It's always wonderful to have, even if it's a negative situation in some cases, to have somebody talk about their reality and what they really encountered, because we can learn about these things, but until you kind of put things into action, you don't really know what you're going to run into. While we're waiting for folks, please put questions in the chat. We don't have anything pending right now, but Nathaniel, you were talking about, like, out of the gate, you should do this and this and this. I was wondering if you guys could say, the folks who are here today, what would you say is like the thing that they should do first? Like, depending on what they're looking at, Is it your team? Is it um, due diligence? Like if you're looking at a building, let's say, what's the first thing you think people should do?
I would say it's understanding your program and how, and like working with your architect to make sure your program is aligned with the zoning.
Yeah, that was going to be my thought is fully nailing down exactly what it is you want to do and what's just going to be happening in that space. Because then you can, when you talk to an architect or whoever, you can be very detailed as to exactly what you want to do and how many people and how loud or what have you. And then they can put you in the right direction or tell you the right zoning or what have you. So yeah, just detailing that out, I think is very important.
Yeah. Um, there's a question in the chat. I think it's a little bit, it's connected, but not really. Curious about the co-op model. And so this is a question for you, Nathaniel. And I guess we could talk about it maybe today in the context of, does that have a relationship to the property and the property ownership? Are they co-owners in the property, or are they just co like a part of the artistic co-op itself?
Yeah, so in our case, and I can't really speak for all co-ops because some co-ops are very different. But in our
Mhm.
case, the cooperative owns the organization. I mean, owns the building.
Okay.
So yes, it will come into the cooperative model comes into play if we ever decide to sell the building. But the biggest piece of that is our cooperative members have ownership in democratic ownership in terms of what do we do with the building. So I always give the example of say if someone shows up and offers us $5 million to buy our building, me or my board or whoever, we can't just say, yeah, let's take it and run.
Hmm.
We put it to a democratic vote. Everybody has to decide, okay, do we want to take this money? If we do want to sell the building, do we want to buy something else afterwards? Where do we go? What kind of program do we want to do? And then if we do end up selling the building, we have what's called capital accounts. So everybody who's a worker owner or even an artist owner, because we have two ownership classes, have capital accounts. So those capital accounts will get paid out first, and then we decide what we want to do with the rest. Does it stay within the organization? Do we dissolve the org? So we have our entire bylaws or our cooperative agreement that kind of details how we deal with that. But it is owned under ownership of everyone within the cooperative.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions out there? We have a minute or two for anything that's pressing. We're just the comments that I'm getting for you guys is that everybody's really appreciating this webinar, how you've broken down the information, and it's really helpful. Let's see. Wondering about if someone could speak more to what main points folks should include in their proposals when reaching out and building relationships with funders. Learning the difference between what capital versus what a programming funder is looking for.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll speak to what capital funders are looking for. So I think, and we'll share the slides out via email, but I think it's like what we mentioned earlier, and actually we should link to the first, we can email the first slide deck out, Megan. So
Mhm.
we did a email, the first presentation, Tiffany, was about what funders look for in capital funding. But essentially it is that readiness framework. They want to see that you have the organizational capacity to take on a facility project. They want to see that you have a business plan and that you can literally like take on a facility project, that you have the organizational capacity, that you've thought about the program, that you have thought about how to get the capital, right? That you have thought about all the risks, that you have a path to site control. So if you ask a funder for money, but you don't have a site identified, they're going to say, well, why would I give you money if you don't have a site yet? So you need to have a site identified, or at least a path to a site identified. Or you need to have a very specific ask. Can you help me fund the acquisition of the building? Or can you help me fund a very specific part of the renovation? So I think it's important to think about like what your ask is. Are you asking them to fund the acquisition, the renovation, a part of the renovation? They want to see that you're ready that you have the capacity to own the building, right? And that's really different than operating programs out of a parks department building or out of a shared space. So those are some of the things that I think it's really tied to the real estate readiness aspect. Do you have the money to pay for an architect? And have you thought about like the expanded revenue and expenses it's going to take to operate an actual building? And is that different than, using free space?
Great. Well, this has been a wonderful webinar. What we'd like to do right now is we're going to stop recording. So I'm just going to say